Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm going to try to crank this out before I run off to work. If you're new here, my name is Scott Carter. I am a licensed therapist here in the beautiful state of Utah. I specialize in a lot of different things, and one thing that I have inadvertently ended up being a little bit of an expert on is borderline personality disorder, also narcissistic personality disorder, especially high conflict parenting, high conflict co-parenting, those types of things. I do a lot of work with teenagers. I have for almost 19 years now. And I have encountered a lot of kids with a lot of different issues. And over the years, I have seen a lot of problems arise for kids. And there is a lot of concerns that I've developed around borderline personality disorder when it comes to parenting. Okay. And the reason why I make videos about this is I just don't believe that we do enough in this country or this world, even in society, to protect children. We don't do enough to prevent child abuse. We don't do enough to end, we don't do nearly enough to end abuse cycles. Unfortunately, it is often true that people who have borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder were subjected to child abuse when they were young, and that is tragic and horrible and awful. But unfortunately, they have a tendency to perpetuate abuse cycles to some degree or another. And I just would rather make a lot more efforts to end those cycles, protect children in the long run of things. And I know that people who have BPD, they tend to get very, very unhappy with me when I raise concerns about them being parents or state that I don't believe that raising children is necessarily a good decision for them or a good road for them. To hear that, but I'm thinking about the children. I'm not thinking about them. Borderline personality disorder, right? There's an overlap with narcissism, and that's the narcissism coming out. But what about me? I'm thinking about the children more than I'm thinking about you. That's just the bottom line. So without further ado, well, first, let's see, where's my advance? I need to advance the slide. I want to talk about why people who have borderline have children in the first place. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I try to keep these videos pretty quick, pretty brief. I've heard this particular thing many, many times from people who have borderline. They want to have children because they want somebody to love them. Okay. And one of my biggest concerns about this is that they have no evidence to back this up. To them, feelings are facts. So if they get it into their heads and they feel like children will nurture them and once and for all help them feel loved, you can't deter them. To them, facts are feelings. I could present every argument in the world why this is a myth and why you should not place it on a child's shoulders to fix you. They're not having it. They feel like children are going to love them, and so they're just going to. So generally, they have children because they want someone to love them. Okay, babies don't love you. Toddlers don't love you. Teenagers are not wired to love you. Okay, children are extremely egocentric and they're extremely selfish through the first 20 plus years of their lives. And they're not going to think about you. They're going to think about themselves. Okay. But again, this is one of my primary concerns about borderline parents is they don't take this into consideration. They just expect children to come out of the womb and start loving them. But let's get into it. Okay. Number one on this list is kids don't get the help that they need. And BPD parents always end up taking the priority. And I'm going to give you an example. I've seen this many, many times. Okay. Let's say that a school teacher notices that the child, even at young ages, maybe the kid is 6, 7 years old even, and notices maybe that the kid is having some really maladaptive behaviors. Maybe the kid doesn't eat well. Maybe the kid is really struggling academically. Maybe the kid has a lot of tantrums, emotional meltdowns, does not play well with the other children, or maybe the kid is being bullied. Maybe there are signs of abuse, right? And it may not be necessarily be at the hands of the borderline parent, but what happens when you bring this to the attention of the borderline parent? They make it about them, okay? So, and I ran into this very recently. or at least a story of this, where, excuse me, got some crap in my throat. Teacher basically tells the borderline parent, hey, your kiddo is struggling academically, struggling to make friends, struggling to interact well with the other children. And in the aftermath, what ends up happening is the borderline parent is absolutely beside themselves that the teacher is attacking them about what a bad parent they are. The borderline parent is furious that the teacher is accusing them of being a bad parent, but the kid is still having these issues and they need to be addressed, and the kid needs help. And the borderline parent ends up making such a fuss that everybody tends to crowd around them and try to console them instead of actually helping the child. So the kid's needs just tumbles down the list of priorities. And kids have a really hard time getting the help and support that they need because the borderline parent always ends up taking priority. Number 2, man, sorry. The older kids often end up taking, they often take parenting or caretaking roles, mostly for the younger kids, okay? I've seen this many times, okay? The younger kids, even at young ages, 9, 10 years old, start feeding the younger kids, bathing them, getting them to school, putting them to bed, doing their laundry, etc. They end up, sometimes even older kids end up taking like a primary parenting role more so than the borderline parent. And the borderline parent always says this, well, it's important for them to help out around the house and take, some responsibility for the household chores and stuff. Okay, it's one thing to get the kid to do some vacuuming or to take out the garbage or to like mow the lawn. It's an entirely different thing to have the kid take care of the other kids. This is not appropriate. It is highly inappropriate to start putting 9, 10-year-old kids in charge of taking care of the younger kids. Entirely inappropriate. Okay, the non-borderline parent, the one that tends to be a lot more passive, they're just as culpable. They stand by and watch this happen, and they do nothing about it. They're just as much on the hook. Number 3, okay, this is a big concern too. I see this all the time. The kids are left unsupervised. For example, I have a short list here. The borderline parent may stay in their room for hours and hours. They just lock the door and the kids are like at the door, mommy. And the parent is just basically unresponsive. I've seen situations where the borderline parent will leave the home for several hours. I'm going to go run a couple of errands and they're gone for like 4 or 5 hours. Okay, and they are notorious for not leaving the kids with proper supervision. And what often ends up happening is kids who are not old enough to supervise end up supervising. And quite frankly, the stories that I hear, it's basically the Lord of the Flies at the home. The older kids are basically using the younger kids as stepping stones. They're hitting them. They're mistreating them poorly. And kids have a mean streak, dude. Kids have a selfish streak. They can be really mean and horrible to other kids, and it doesn't really bother them. Kids should not. There's a reason why we should not leave kids unsupervised. But I see this all the time from borderline parents. I'm going to go run a couple of errands, kids. I'll be back, and they're not answering their phone. We have no idea where they've gone, and the kids, it's just chaos. Borderline parents have a tendency to undermine and sabotage healthy development. I think I misspelled sabotage. Oops. I'm in a rush. Oh, well. So I've seen this many times. BPD parents are jealous when their children appear to thrive or engage in healthy things. Okay, like let's say the kid is getting good grades and they're getting some accolades at school, and the borderline parent is jealous, they're threatened, and they kind of have an attitude of like, well, good for you, and almost angry at the child. They discourage their accomplishments. They're not proud of them because they're threatened by their children thriving. I've also seen many times, this one really troubles me the most, more so, is that borderline parents can be really threatened by when their children develop friendships. And, I've seen borderline parents that will say, oh, you love them, but not me, and the kid ends up just kind of staying home. Their social development is severely arrested because they're afraid of upsetting mom. By the way, I do refer to borderline's typically female and narcissist typically male. The numbers are overwhelmingly that narcissists tend to be male, borderlines tend to be female. And I believe there's a reason for that, and I'm thinking about doing a separate video on it. So when I refer to borderline, I use the female pronoun because most of the time they are women. And number 5, okay, children take adult roles at young ages. Now, I've seen situations where the borderline parent is they struggle to function as adults. Their own emotional development was severely arrested and is highly dysfunctional, and it is very difficult for them to make really good, solid, objective judgments as an adult, and they can easily fall apart. If you're close to someone who has borderline, you probably have seen many instances where they just fall apart over. I mean, there's a crisis every single day. Everything's a crisis. The term distress tolerance is often used when it comes to borderline because they're just unable to tolerate distress. They just fall apart. And so what happens is the kids often end up taking these adult roles at young ages. So the borderline parent may say, "What should we do? What should we do?" And the kid's like 8. The kid's like, "I'm 8, man. I don't know." But the oldest child especially usually ends up taking on adult and parental roles when the parent is falling apart, when the borderline parent is falling apart. And as that child grows older, they end up being more of an adult in the family than the borderline parent. And that's just not appropriate. Kids need to be kids. Usually the oldest child ends up growing up really, really fast. By 15, 16, they're expected to be a full-blown adult because mom is falling apart. So hopefully I'll get a few more cranked out. These particular concerns that I have are not necessarily applicable to divorce situations. That's an entirely different animal. So if you divorce someone who has BPD, there's a separate set of concerns, parenting concerns that I have in a divorce situation. So make sure that you subscribe and all that stuff if you want more information on this. And that is going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Take care.